Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to the HAE and BAYS for allowing me to talk about two of probably not the sexiest subjects, but they are very important. The impact of Brexit on GDPR. Now, whatever you hear in the news, what's happening yesterday, tomorrow, who knows, but the key point about today in today's presentation is for you to all become aware of the impact that Brexit is going to have on GDPR, whether it's a deal or no deal. So at some stage we should have one or the other, but at the moment we're obviously in sort of like limbo in inverted commas, so nothing has changed as things stand. So I just want to walk through at a fairly high level what the impact or the implications of Brexit on GDPR and data protection is going to be, and happy to field any questions after the presentation. So, quick introduction. My name is Avi Verdi. I'm the principal of Smart Tech Business Solutions, and we provide technology and data solutions. And I myself am GDPR qualified. I've taken a course via IT Governance, who are one of the most reputable data organisations in the UK. Quick disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. Okay, so what I'm going to give you, the information I'm going to give you is going to be informational. If you have attorneys, if you have lawyers in-house teams, or if you have data protection officers, then you really need to discuss with them the more details. Okay, so this session is not really about explaining what GDPR is, although I am quite proud in that I've managed to fit all of GDPR into one slide. So in principle, GDPR is about personal data, and I have to make an assumption here that people in this room are familiar with the rudiments of GDPR. I don't expect you all to be experts, but certainly you should understand that GDPR is data protection for personal data. Personal data is anything which can identify an individual, and that includes an email address, both a business email address as well as a personal email address. Its reach is global, and the key section here in this reach, it says any organisation that offers, the definition of GDPR is any organisation, or GDPR applies to any organisation that offers goods or services or monitors the behaviour of either EU citizens or individuals in the EU. Many of you, GDPR came into effect a year and a half or so ago, and I'm sure many of you went through maybe a painful auditing process to get to know where all your data is, so you're probably familiar with some of these things. Sharing data, you need to have contracts between controllers and processors. I'll try and keep this talk as atechnical as possible, so avoid very sort of like technical GDPR terms. Controllers and processors, just think of them as companies that we share data with. International transfers, so if you want to transfer your data internationally, there are certain safeguards for the data, certain rules you have to follow, and we'll be covering that under GDPR, under Brexit, under this talk, because that's one of the areas which will be most affected by what's going to happen. And then the basic principles, I won't go into the detail on these. The key things is that all data you hold, you must adhere to the key principles of having just the minimum amount of data. You must ask yourself where the data came from, why you have it, and when you don't need it, you dispose of it or delete it completely. For each bit of data you have, you must have a lawful legal basis. There are 6 bases altogether. The ones which most commonly I think will affect the people in this room would be consent, or probably more likely legitimate interest as you're all members of membership associations, as well as contracts as well, because you offer services, goods and services, mostly to business. You will have contracts in place with the business. The rights of individuals, this is relatively new in GDPR, so now each person whose data you hold has a right to access their data and various other rights. And the key term here, the most important one, is accountability. So you hold personal data of other people, you are accountable for that data. If anything goes wrong, then it's your responsibility. And that's why you need contracts when you share that data with third parties, because if anything goes wrong at their end, then you're both jointly responsible. Okay, so for every business, and again, like I mentioned, you probably went through this audit a year and a half ago, or slightly longer if you're the bigger organization, a bit more panicked if you're a smaller organization. But the question here is, where is your personal data? Basically, whichever industry you're in, you will have personal data in your applications, the services you provide, and within your organization, whether you're a small organization or a large one. And almost certainly everyone in this room will have employee data. So I'm talking about lists of employees, of suppliers, partners, clients if you're B2B, customers if you're B2C, contractors, apprentices, trainees. If you hold events, don't forget you may have hundreds or thousands of data records for people who attend your events. So they all fall under GDPR as well. And of course, special mention for children, there are special measures required if you hold children's data. So which sort of applications, where within your organization would you find this data? For multinationals in this organization, you probably have an ERP system. Other organizations will certainly probably have a CRM system, email marketing, a membership system. So I realize that most of you are members of associations within this room. So your association leads would have membership systems with lots of personal data. Some of you have online shops, which I've seen. So just be mindful of that. Don't overlook the fact that you've got data on your online shops or e-commerce websites, and various other systems as well. So what format can personal data take? Obviously, we think in terms of electronic, but it can be paper as well. Backups, both electronic and on paper. You might have off-site archives, both electronic and paper. And our famous old ones, spreadsheets and emails. Just a reminder that one place where personal data resides, I can assure you, is within your inbox, because you may have spreadsheets of employee information, delegates data, which we may forward to a third party or forward internally. So now that spreadsheet is both in your inbox and in your sent items. And if you then file it, it may end up within a folder, within your Outlook or Gmail. So that's just a place to be careful that you may have a lot of personal data within your emails. As I mentioned earlier, the reach of GDPR is global and international. So this is going to be significant as we start looking at the impact of Brexit. Quick pause. We're okay?
Yep, keep.
Okay. Okay, so moving now on to one of the most common questions I hear is, will GDPR still apply to UK businesses after Brexit? So I don't know if you consider this good news or bad news. The answer is actually there'll be two GDPRs. One is for your EU data and one is for your UK data. So the UK government is going to create or embed EU GDPR into UK law, and that will apply to the data of UK citizens or individuals in the UK. So for you people in this room, at the moment you've thought of all your data as EU data, which is UK data plus the data of the other 27 countries within the EU. Okay, so going forward, you're going to have to start thinking about your UK data separately, because that's going to fall under the UK GDPR, whereas the data of the 27 other countries, the personal data of the 27 other countries, will then fall under the EU GDPR. Okay, so that's the first significant change, deal or no deal, that you're going to have to start thinking about. Quick look at, so the other big area now, or one of the big areas, is transferring data between countries. A quick look at the current situation. So current legal basis, so you need a legal basis before you can transfer data from one country to another. the current legal basis is within the EU, each 28 countries can exchange data under what's called an adequacy decision. So there are no restrictions. Okay. Similarly, there are selected countries in the world. At the last count, I think it was about 15, up to 15 countries, with whom the EU has negotiated what's called an adequacy decision. So those countries have shown that they observe the right of law and respect data protection principles, so there are no restrictions to transfer data to and from those countries. Those countries include Uruguay, New Zealand, Canada, and Japan. Although Canada and Japan, there are a slight asterisk on those, but I won't get into detail right now. So when it comes to US, if you exchange data with US companies, you can do so without any restriction, provided they fall within the what's called the EU-US Privacy Shield. And most of your big operators, most of the big multinationals that we hear about all the time, the Googles, Apples, the tech companies, and various other sectors, they will all be covered by the Privacy Shield. But many of the smaller ones won't, so you just need to be wary of that, because that's why on the rest of the world third country side, you find the US here as well. So those companies in the US which are not covered by the Privacy Shield fall under this category here. So the rest of the world, right, in this example I've just got Mexico, China, and curiously Australia, okay? For those countries, exchanging data now, you need various mechanisms in place, but the one I'm going to concentrate on is standard contractual clauses. Okay, so since you're all experts in GDPR, and since some of you in this room probably already exchange data with third countries, then you probably already have standard contractual clauses in place. And that's going to be significant as the UK comes out of the EU, because the UK then will fall under this bucket here. Okay, so let's come on to that. So at the moment, the UK is within this bucket, and that's what the next slide shows. So the transfer of personal data between the UK and EEA, current situation. So I mentioned EEA here. So GDPR covers the EU 28 countries, plus I think 3 others, Norway, Liechtenstein, and one other, I believe, which together make up the EEA. Okay, so presently, you can exchange data between the two both ways without any restrictions under, as I mentioned before, an adequacy decision. Okay, so what happens after Brexit? Okay, so a couple of things. All right. Now, firstly, if there's a deal, then nothing will change in exchange between the UK and the EU. Because the UK will go into a transition period, yeah, and within that transition period, there will be time for the UK to have an adequacy approval. I mentioned earlier that the moment the UK leaves the EU, it will no longer have the adequacy decision it has at the moment. But if we go into a transition period, there will be time to have that adequacy approval. So the exchange between the UK and the EU should not be affected in the case of a deal. Both ways, two-way transfer will not be affected. However, and again, in spite of the news you might have heard in the last couple of days, a no deal is not impossible. Whether it's in 3 months' time, whether it's longer after that, we don't quite know. But if there is a new deal, okay, then, as I mentioned before, the EU will instantly leave the club. The EU will the UK will leave the EU club. The UK will instantly become a third country. Okay, it will no longer have the adequacy decision which it currently has. Okay, and an alternative safeguard will be required, which was the standard contractual clauses. So there are other safeguards available. If you work for a multinational, then you may be covered under binding corporate rules. but for the most SMEs in this room, you need to think about the fact that you need to have standard contractual clauses in place, and these clauses need to be set up by your EU partners who send you data. So from the EU to the UK, those transfers need standard contractual clauses. And just looking at standard contractual clauses in a bit more detail, for those in this room who don't currently have any in place, okay, these are very fixed templates which cannot be changed, and different versions are available. They're available for free. They're available from the Icao website. I'll refer to that later on, as well as the European bodies. You have different versions, which is controller to controller and controller to processor, depending on who's going to do what with the data. And instead of controller processor, the clauses refer to the terms importer and exporter of data. And basically, the clauses define how data can be exchanged between the importer and exporter within very strict guidelines. So these contracts need to be in place before transfer of data from the EU to the UK in the case of no deal Brexit. Okay, so I mentioned the other adequacy countries earlier on. So what about the transfer of UK data from the UK to those countries after Brexit? Okay. The answer is, going from the UK to those countries, the UK government has recognised that it will continue with the adequacy decision which the EU has made, but for data from those countries back to the UK, bilateral discussions are ongoing with each country. In most cases, from what I've seen, there probably won't be much impact, but do just check. Yeah. But this is after Brexit, so in the case of a deal, then there should be time to have all these discussions completed. If there's a no deal, then if your organisation transfers company to any of these third countries, or with an adequacy decision, then just find out exactly the legality of transferring data back from those countries back into the UK. Transfers under the privacy shield, there's a minor change. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I don't think that's going to affect a lot of people in this room. But there is a minor change, which is really a wording change on the part of the US company, which is covered by the privacy shield. Now, another very significant change, which is going to impact people in this country, is the fact that the need for a representative. Okay. So currently, these countries in the rest of the world, or third countries and adequacy countries, they need to have a representative within the EU. Okay. If they don't have a branch or an affiliate within the EU. So say, for example, you're a call center in the Philippines or India, you provide services to UK companies, you don't have a representative, you don't have an office within the EU, then you need to appoint a representative who will represent you in the case of any inquiries from the relevant supervisory authority, like the Icao here in the UK. Okay? A representative can be a person or an individual. Okay? If you have a branch or a sister company within the EU, then you don't need to appoint a representative. So coming on to the UK leaving the EU, when the UK is outside the EU, it will be a third country. So UK businesses, some of you in this room, will need to appoint a representative within the EU country with whom you do the most business. Okay, and likewise, and this is just subject to final confirmation, all EU companies that process the data of UK citizens will need to appoint representative within the UK. Okay, so this is new. So the UK and the EU having to appoint representatives in each other's jurisdictions, that is new, and that's going to affect people in the street. And that happens regardless of a deal Brexit or a no deal Brexit. And don't forget your cloud service providers. Okay, so when we talk about sharing data or exchanging data, I talked about spreadsheets and emails earlier on, but don't forget your website, your e-commerce site, or all your cloud applications. Where are they hosted? Okay, they might be hosted in the US. For many of you, you might be using Amazon Web Services, AWS, which may be hosted in Ireland. After Brexit, the UK will no longer be part of the EU, so Ireland, so in effect, any hosting which you have in Ireland will be considered an international transfer. Okay? And as it is, what you need to look at, what you need to do is have a look at the policies, the Brexit policies for each of the cloud service providers that you use. And this is quite a good example. This is on AWS, Amazon Web Services. I'm sure many people in this room do actually use AWS. But they've made a statement of exactly what the impact will be of a no-deal Brexit. Okay? And they said they already have standard contractual clauses in place, so no action is needed on the parts of their clients. But again, do go and check this for each of the cloud service providers you use, and ask where is your data hosted, or where are they hosting, and whether you need any sort of clauses in place. Okay, another significant change. So the supervisory authority in the UK is the Icao, the Information Commissioner's Office. At the moment, it handles all data for EU citizens, which includes the UK citizens. After Brexit, it will only be responsible for the data of UK citizens, or individuals in the UK, as the exact term is. And as I mentioned right earlier on, because there are going to be two jurisdictions, because there are going to be two jurisdictions, the EU GDPR and the UK GDPR, then, and this isn't fun, there is a potential of fines in the event of a data breach from both the ICO, if UK data is breached, as well as a suitable EU supervisory authority if EU data is breached. So that's something just to be wary of. We heard those scare stories of 23 million euros or dollars fines, potential fines. Certainly you don't want two of those coming your way. Okay, so practical final steps. First things first, if you haven't already registered with the ICO, I recommend you do that. It only costs £35 per year, and it shows the ICO that you take data protection and personal data seriously. Ask your EU partners to send you data for their standard contractual clauses. Okay. Now, you're only going to need that in the event of a no-deal Brexit, but there's no harm in actually having those discussions now. Don't forget, they need to issue the clauses because they need to legalise the transfer from the EU to the UK. The data from the UK to the EU doesn't need any further paperwork. Look for a representation or representative in the EU. Can be an individual or a company. Okay, I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find lots of options. Maybe there are recommendations that your membership organisation can make for you. Review all your systems to see where they're hosted. Okay, so that's the bit about the SaaS systems, and look for the supplier to have standard contractual clauses, as I showed you with AWS. Slight changes to recording. Under GDPR, you need to keep an Article 30 report of all your processing of EU citizens' data now you need to have a mirror of that, one for UK data, one for EU data. Just update your privacy policy or privacy notice just to reflect the fact that the UK is now outside the EU after Brexit. Some of the bigger companies in here will have a DPO already, a data protection officer who looks after all their data protection needs, as well as subject access requests, etc. That person can continue to operate in their current role, covering both the EU GDPR and the UK GDPR, and update any other documentation that makes any reference to the UK data and EU data. So more information, you can find out more information at on the ico.org.uk website. That's my contact details, and that's my website. And I'm now open to questions. Thank you very much.